Okay, hello everybody. I'd like to just welcome everybody to Efficiency Canada's weekly discovery session. This is a session that we do each week with different speakers. This week, you are lucky to get a presentation from some of us at Efficiency Canada ourselves, although that does happen other times, but mostly it's people within our network and experts and people that are really knowledgeable about energy efficiency on a variety of different topics. So if this is the first discovery that you're coming to, I hope we do a good job in interesting you to come back for more. For those of you that are repeat participants in the discovery session, you might be wondering why I am doing this. So I'll just introduce myself. My name is James Gady. I'm research manager at Efficiency Canada. And I'm also project lead on the scorecard project, which is what we're going to be talking about today, but I'll get to that in a moment. Our usual presenter, I think, is usually Allison. So she's off this week and I'll doing my best to host discovery in her stead. Okay, as you might know, Efficiency Canada is a virtual organization, but we are actually based out of Carleton University, which is located on the traditional and unceded territories of the Algonquin Nation. Okay, so today we are here to talk about the 2022 Canadian Energy Efficiency Scorecard, looking at provinces and territories specifically. Your presenters today will be myself, but also my co-authors of the scorecard, Alyssa Nippard, who is a research associate here at Efficiency Canada, and Brendan Haley, who is our policy director. Today, we will be going through 4 parts of the scorecard project. First, Alyssa will start off to give a little bit of background on the purpose and methodology of the scorecard. Then it'll come to me and I'll do a quick overview of the high-level 2022 results, the national level results for the scorecard. I'll pass it to Brendan, who will go through the provincial and territorial highlights. And then finally, it'll come back to me and I'll just remind you all that there is an accompanying policy database available online to the scorecard, which is a helpful resource for doing research and comparing and contrasting things across the provinces for energy efficiency. So I will now pass it to Alyssa.
All right, thanks, James, and welcome everyone. We're going to get started with the purpose and methodology of the scorecard. All right, so this is the 4th year that we have produced a scorecard. In it, we track 5 key policy areas, which include efficiency programs, enabling policies, buildings, transportation, and industry. The metrics that we track can be categorized into one of 3 types. So we have policy metrics, which generally capture qualitative data, outcome-based metrics, which capture quantitative data, and then there can also be a mix of the 2. So all in all, we score each province and territory out of a total of 100 possible points, with a mix of metric types that lean slightly heavier towards the outcomes. So as we're developing the scorecard each year, we have 3 primary goals. So the first is to track and report energy efficiency policies and program outcomes, of course. The next is to benchmark and then share best practices of the leading performers. And then lastly, we of course want to promote some friendly competition between the provinces and territories. So what you see here is the scorecard development process. So we begin at the start of the year where we discuss what changes we might want to see, whether that be to the scoring or to metrics. We then prepare and distribute information requests to our contacts throughout the provinces and territories. And then once we receive these completed information requests back, we begin to analyze the information and then start writing the scorecard draft. Lastly, what we do is we circulate the draft for peer review, and that just makes sure we correct anything for accuracy, we make any necessary revisions. And then, of course, as we're doing today, we prepare that scorecard for release and give this type of presentation. Okay, so this is a timeline of what we're looking at in each scorecard. So the scorecard captures the most recent 12 months of data that is available. So in practice, this means that the period covered occurs somewhere between a month window, beginning in January 2021. So we do this for 2 reasons. One, we need to accommodate program administrators working on fiscal year reporting periods rather than calendar years. And then 2, we understand that policy change takes time, of course. So we allow a grace period of about 6 months into year 2 for the implementation. This year, we're very excited to say that we've been able to include Yukon in the full scorecard for the first time. Energy efficiency policy and program tracking in the territories has historically presented a challenge for us. This is due both to resource constraints in the territories themselves and at Efficiency Canada, and also due to a limitation in data. So we are very excited to have Yukon in the scorecard this year. We continue to work with Northwest Territories and Nunavut to hopefully one day be able to include them in the full scorecard as well. So this year we've included 3 new metrics. The first metric is one that tracks the involvement of nonprofit and public interest interveners in the utility regulatory process. The second is a metric that tracks fuel switching policies and programs. And then the third is a new metric that tracks appliance and equipment standards across the country. All right, so as a result of adding new metrics and reorganizing some others, Throughout the scorecard, we often see that the points available per metric change per year. So this year, there are some minor scoring adjustments that were made. You can see in the table to the right. So as you see, the programming sections increased by 2 points and the enabling section decreased by 1 point. And a little bit further here, again, building section also increased by 2 points, and the transportation section decreased by 3.25 points. And there was no change to the industry section. Throughout the scorecard, what we do is we aim for an overall balance across policy areas to reflect energy efficiency potential. All right, so lastly for my bit here, I just want to remind you that these scores earned by the provinces and territories shouldn't be necessarily seen as a percentage grade. Instead, what we encourage is think of this as like a perfect score, reaching that top peak efficiency as summiting a mountain. It's obviously a difficult task. There's a lot of work ahead of us, but it's also possible to reach that peak. And we see a lot of provinces and territories that are making strides to get there. All right, that's it for me. So I'm going to pass it over to James to share the results.
Awesome. Thank you, Alyssa. I'm going to quickly go through some of the top level national results and the overall scoring before we get into the provincial and territorial highlights. As you may know, as part of the scorecard project, we track net incremental energy savings for both electricity and natural gas and also non-regulated fuels in each province and now the Yukon as well. And we've done so for some time. And so we're able to provide this longer term national overview look at the trends in energy savings. Last year, it appeared as if there was a downward trend in net incremental energy savings, which was somewhat concerning. You can see in 2021, we found that there was a pretty good rebound. A lot of that is due to increased electricity savings in both Ontario and Alberta, but natural gas savings also went up too, which is encouraging. We would like to hope to see these trends continue, although the nature of the electricity increases in Ontario and Alberta does lead to the possibility that they might not be a long-term trend upward, although recent announcements in Ontario to increase the budget for electricity efficiency programs at the ISO might help to make that a kind of enduring trend moving forward. So on the other side, we also track program spending. So this chart is showing you national program spending and energy efficiency program portfolio spending. So not only is it including spending on efficiency programs, but also enabling strategies as well, which include a number of different things. It can include work to promote codes and standards, but it can also include undertaking conservation potential studies or marketing and awareness for programs and so on and so forth. I realize I didn't explain this on the last chart, but there is a component on this that you might notice is called multi-fuel. And maybe that's a little bit confusing because it's a pretty big component of the spending in this chart. Multi-fuel is effectively two things. For some program administrators that we collect data from, we're not able to break out the spending between natural gas and non-regulated fuels, but it is either for one of those two energy sources. And then also for some other program administrators, enabling policies spending is included in that. So the multi-fuel category is somewhat larger in the spending. This year, we found that continuation of a plateau, effectively, which is not great. You can see that spending increased consecutively in each of the 3 years from 2016 to 2018, and then declined a little bit and has remained steady. So we're really hoping that this isn't a long-term trend because we really need to see budgets for energy efficiency programs continue to increase if we would like to hit our climate change goals for 2030. Okay, and finally, a quick look at the overall results for this year. So as Alyssa mentioned, we benchmarked the provinces across 5 different areas, which are programs enabling buildings, transport, and industry. This chart is showing you the rounded total score for each province or territory in those policy areas. Because the scores are rounded, they might not add up. So save that question if that occurred to you. And the darker boxes are the province that led in that. So this year we had a couple interesting movements in rank. We typically don't like to focus on the raw score that a province gets year in and year out because of the slight changes in methodology we make. We prefer instead to look at the ranks. And so you can see that there's some horizontal white bars here. Those are cordoning the provinces off into tiers as we see it based on where they fall in a kind of 10-point score range. So you've got down at the bottom there from 10 to 19, and then second tier Manitoba in the 20 to 29 range, and so on and so forth. So a couple interesting things this year. Not only did Nova Scotia break into the top tier for the first time, they also surpassed Quebec to take second place for the first time in the 4 years that we've done this. BC stayed in first place, but Nova Scotia did manage to eke out a win, or not a win necessarily, but eke out just ahead of Quebec, largely due to their strength of their program spending and savings. But Brendan will talk a little bit more to that. The other kind of interesting development was that PEI managed to just surpass Ontario and take fourth place, just by a hair. there. The scores look like it's tied, but I'm pretty sure the raw score has PEI up by a quarter point. And that is largely due to PEI's commitments in the buildings section, committing to get to net zero energy ready buildings by 2030. Outside of that, as Alyssa noted, this is the first year that we've been able to include Yukon on nearly all the metrics. And as you can see, they performed quite admirably, taking 6th place. And that's the overall summary of the top level results. So now I will pass it over to Brendan, and he'll go into a little bit more detail for each province and territory.
Thanks, James. Hi, everyone. In the scorecard, we collect data, we collect comparative data, and there's lots of different ways you can compare across the provinces. But we also do our best to understand the unfolding of events and the context in each province and territory as best we can. So at the end of the report, you'll find a summary for each province, and that includes a write-up on major events that have occurred in that province over the past year, events we anticipate might. It gives us an opportunity to discuss policy commitments that you might see in things like climate plans that will not make their way into the scoring because the scoring has a particular period of analysis. It's also about performance and policies that are implemented and not committed to. But I'm going to now fairly quickly walk through really some interesting policy stories that we see in the different provinces and territories this year. So if we go to the top province, which is BC, the Clean BC plan has a number of nation-leading policy initiatives. And just a short list. He is now committing to developing and implementing a zero carbon new building code by 2030. So that will add emission considerations to the net zero energy ready standard that they've had in place, and that makes up some of the new federal building codes. The province is now consulting on making all new space and water heating at least 100% efficient by 2030, so that will go a long way to incenting heat pumps. All new home listings will require an energy efficiency label. Then on the utility side, the province plans to place GHG caps on natural gas utilities and phase out utility incentives for traditional gas, space and water heating. And so consultations are also underway on that policy change now. If you're a utility regulation person, you might also be interested to know that they're looking at changing cost effectiveness testing from a total resource cost test to a utility cost test, which tends to really give a boost in efficiency programs. So as BC implements these policies, they're going to continue to do well on future scorecards. We like to highlight opportunities we see in different provinces. So for BC, we're talking about using energy efficiency strategies to manage the extreme heat events the province has started to experience, such as coupling the deployment of air conditioning with heat pumps and implementing minimum efficiency performance standards for high-rise buildings. Second is this idea of taking a mission-oriented approach. So BC is an interesting case, I think, of some of the policy constraints of utility demand-side management, which do very well in incenting the deployment of proven solutions, yet it's a little bit more difficult to take risks to explore solutions that are either uncertain or perhaps are not cost-effective today, but need to be in the future. So we see the BC utilities not targeting all cost-effective energy efficiency identified due to uncertainties over the level of participation in their programs. So we're suggesting this mission-oriented approach existing alongside utility DSM that can really welcome uncertainty as a way to learn and as a way to explore new energy saving strategies. So moving to Nova Scotia, the second place finish there is principally explained by higher program savings than previous years, as well as higher spending in equity-focused areas related to low-income and Indigenous community programs. And this is going to continue. The latest electricity efficiency plan aims to spend 20% of the entire budget on under-resourced communities. So Nova Scotia is a province with a big goal to hit net zero emissions. One obvious way to align efficiency policy with that net zero goal is to make all new buildings net zero energy ready. That standard is now defined under the new model building codes. All right, if we move to Quebec, the big strength remains transportation in Quebec. That's not just electric vehicles, that's also the highest per capita transit funding and the highest per capita ridership. Probably the most interesting thing coming out of Quebec is the dual fuel heating program that launched this summer, where Hydro-Quebec and the energy or natural gas utility are working together to provide incentives for systems that use electric heat pumps for most hours of the year, and then leaving natural gas heat to its highest value use, essentially as a peak supply resource on those coldest days of the year. A big theme in Quebec is moving to mandatory policies. So that dual fuel program, that's an incentive program, but with the ambition to decarbonize the entire heating system. Doing the latter likely requires complementary policy approaches like we see in BC, making all new heating systems 100% efficient. The other really interesting thing in Quebec is Montreal is requiring energy use reporting from large buildings, and that is expected to lead to mandatory performance standards on both GHGs and energy efficiency for those buildings. So that is a policy that could be taken province-wide, and I think the rest of the country should take note of. Let's move to the next tier. PEI in Ontario switched places this year. PEI continues to move up, and they need to, because this is the province with the most aggressive climate target in the country to hit net zero emissions by 2040. The province continues to have quite high program savings and spending levels, especially for low-income populations. A previous goal existed to hit 2% annual savings as a percentage for both electric and non-electric fuels. That would be the highest energy savings level in the country. It's not unrealistic because that level is frequently achieved by leading American states. PEI seems to be backing off that target, but we hope they strive for those nation-leading energy-saving goals. Ontario is doing some really interesting things with demand response through a capacity auction, as well as location-specific demand-side management. Overall levels of program savings, program spending have tended to be static on the natural gas side and slowly decreasing on the electricity side. However, that might be changing. The title that we've had for Ontario this year is Energy Efficiency to the Rescue, because in September, the government largely reversed budget cuts to electric efficiency to deal with a looming capacity shortage. So Ontario, I think, is a very good example of a trend we're starting to see across the country now. Provinces that were talking about electricity surpluses a couple of years ago are starting to realize they really need energy efficiency, manage electrification, and future supply retirements. Okay, in the Yukon, as James and Alyssa mentioned, this is the first year we've included the Yukon. When we compare spending on a per capita basis, savings as a percentage of demand, Yukon is very high. They rank first in fossil fuel savings, per capita spending, and spending on Indigenous-focused programs. They're also committed to that net zero energy ready building code by 2032. And the territory is accomplishing all this without their utilities actively engaged in demand side management, which could deliver even more savings in the future. New Brunswick, some really important stories have come out of New Brunswick this year that are not reflected in our scoring, but we hope will be. So in February, the Auditor General for the province made extensive use of our previous scorecard findings to recommend policy changes, such as sustainable funding for non-electric programs. And then in the fall, New Brunswick came out with a new climate plan that has a number of strong energy efficiency policies. And they're listed in our report, but just some highlights. They're committing to that net zero energy ready building code by 2030. They're further going to go up the performance tiers that are available in the new national model code starting in 2023. They're aiming to phase out oil heating use in the province by 2030, implement building labeling and disclosure with energy labels at time of sale, and then creating a new fund for non-electric programs, as well as targeting minimum targets for efficiency. So these are all priorities we've discussed in previous scorecards, and we're really glad to see them in the climate plan. New Brunswick's scores should improve in future years. When we benchmark, especially on low-income spending and electricity savings, those commitments in New Brunswick, they'll still be behind other jurisdictions. So in addition to minimum goals, it'd be great to see some stretch goals in these areas. So if we go to Manitoba, Manitoba is also doing a lot of stuff this year, doing a new energy policy framework. So that involves an integrated resource plan with Manitoba Hydro, a new potential study for energy efficiency, that'll inform the next plan for Efficiency Manitoba. This year, Efficiency Manitoba created a new innovation. They've also outlined a fairly extensive suite of programs in partnership with First Nations and Métis communities. One barrier we see in Manitoba that we found through our fuel switching policy tracking, which is policy nerdy, but really important, is that whenever there's an electricity load increase due to measures like a heat pump, that's counted against their electricity savings target. I think that creates a perverse incentive for overall energy efficiency and GHG improvements. And it's a good example of how I think fuel-specific targets and goals, they still make a lot of sense, but they need to be supplemented perhaps with fuel-neutral goals or perhaps GHG goals, or a good definition of beneficial electrification and how we can promote that. All right, if we go to the next tier of provinces, I'm going to go through these a little bit quicker. So in Alberta, we see exciting things happening with the Alberta Eco Trust, working with Edmonton and Calgary on a low-income energy efficiency program on virtual energy labels. Newfoundland's a pretty interesting place to look at electrification policy. They are doing a lot to promote electric vehicles, some heating electrification because they have a surplus coming out of Muskrat Falls. And then Saskatchewan is last place this year. There's very little program activity or new policy initiatives coming out of that province. However, we do see the gas utility, Sask Energy, now starting to introduce some energy saving programs, and Regina has come out with a fairly aggressive energy and climate. So next, the other territories other than the Yukon are not part of the scoring, as Alyssa mentioned, due to some data availability, some comparability issues. But we benchmarked in the report where we could. So if we look at the Northwest Territories, we see relatively high per capita spending, about average electricity savings. Yellowknife's also moving quite quickly to adopt the new version of the building code. And none of it, one of the issues was when the federal Green Homes program came out, there was a lack of energy auditors in the territory. So a training program from the Arctic Renewable Society is working to resolve that. So another aspect of the scorecard is we provide recommendations to the federal government, and it's recommendations about how to bolster provincial and territorial energy efficiency. And if you look back to what we wrote last year, almost every single recommendation we made in last year's scorecard was actually followed up in some way and implemented by the federal government. So that's a good track record. This year, we're making 5 recommendations. First is the suggestion that the federal government help expand low-income energy efficiency programs. In March, we published a report that took a deeper dive into provincial programs. We highlighted gaps that we think the federal government can help fill. And this remains a really glaring federal policy gap. I think as energy efficiency professionals and activists, it's really our responsibility to make sure everyone can benefit from energy efficiency, not just people with higher incomes or, say, businesses. So I encourage you to go to our website. We've got tools where you can easily write to your member of parliament. I really encourage you to try to make this a priority for our federal government so that everyone can benefit from energy efficiency. Second recommendation is to mandate efficient and zero carbon heating systems. That's actually a priority in the federal mandate letters. Third recommendation is to define what net zero building performance is, not just for new buildings, but for existing buildings. And that would be really helpful for municipalities and provinces that we hope introduce mandatory building performance standards. Fourth is to suggest a principle that federal funding should always aim to crowd in more provincial level funding and effort and never create issues that could crowd out or even cannibalize provincial initiatives. So when new federal initiatives are designed, they should really have a strong understanding of potential interactions with provincial policy systems. So things like how are savings attributed, how cost effectiveness testing works. That federal government needs to work with those institutions. And then finally, right now, the federal government is developing a green building strategy. One thing we hope that strategy provides is a clear definition about what that net zero emissions end state looks like, and then providing the funding and technical assistance to go towards those end goals. And we hope they're policy goals. And a good example of that might be the upcoming Net Zero Building Electrification Fund. That's an example where federal funds are aimed at helping provinces and hopefully municipalities institute a policy change, right? So in this case, a mandatory building energy code. Okay, so with that, I'm going to hand it back to James to talk about our awesome database.
Great. All right. Thanks, Brendan. So it occurred to me while you were doing the provincial and territorial overview that we haven't told you where to get the scorecard. So maybe you don't know, but if you don't know, you can access the scorecard at scorecard.efficiencycanada.org. And we revamped the website this year and we're pretty excited about it. So the overview of each province and territory that we've covered in the scorecard that Brendan just went through are also available online. And so if you go to the main landing page, scorecard.efficiencycanada.org, there's a map that shows the rank of each province and territory. And if you click on that, then you'll be taken to the online version of the provincial summary. So I encourage you to check it out. It really looks good. We're really happy with it. And of course, you can also download the scorecard in a PDF format and get access to all of the information for all of the 54 metrics for all of the 11 provinces and territories that we've covered. But also there is another thing available online, and that is the policy database, which is the kind of accompanying product, as it were, to the scorecard. So the scorecard has conventionally been conceived of as a PDF report that looks at a specific time frame, and the 4 that we have done are available from scorecard.efficiencycanada.org to download. But we also maintain an online policy database that contains a lot of the information that is in the scorecard, but also some things that aren't. So policy items related to energy efficiency across the provinces and territories. You can use the database in 2 ways, which is to look at a specific policy area and then see all of the provinces at once. But you can also look at a province and then see all of the items for that province at once. And you can get to the database at database.efficiencycanada.org. So I just wanted to conclude the presentation by making sure that you were aware of how to get the scorecard, but also that the policy database exists and that we maintain it throughout the year. And we are always looking and welcoming feedback and suggestions on how to improve it. Or if you find any information that's out of date, by all means, don't hesitate to send us an email at info@efficiencycanada.org. And that concludes the bulk of our presentation. I see that we've got a number of questions, so I'm going to do my best to facilitate the discussion of these just in the order that they've come in. We may not be able to help you with everyone, but we'll do what we can. Okay, Sharon Bodie asks, what will be the impacts of Bill 23 on energy efficiency? So I think Bill 23 is the Build More Houses Faster, Stronger, Better bill.
Kevin on our team is tracking this closely. So yes, we're extremely concerned about that bill, especially that it seems to disallow what's called green development standards in municipalities. Green development standards are a way that municipalities, through their bylaws and their powers, have been able to require more energy efficient, lower carbon new buildings. And whether it was an accident or not, it seems like as it's written, that might be essentially disallowed. So I encourage everyone to go to the website of the Atmospheric Fund, where they have a campaign to allow you to sign off and communicate to the government that this is a problem with that act. We don't track that policy in the scorecard, and it's because it actually is a municipal policy, and municipal policy is outside of our scope. What we do track is provincial adoption of building codes and their ability to enable the municipalities to adopt their own building code or adopt the different tiers. So this new building code that we have nationally now has these multiple performance tiers. And a great way to use that building code is to allow more advanced municipalities to adopt some of those tiers faster than the rest of the province. And that is the way it's worked in British Columbia for a number of years now. And that's one of the reasons BC continues to be the top of our scorecard.
Awesome. Thanks, Brendan. Okay, I've got a second question here from Aziz Ahmed. Will the presentation slides be made available? It's my understanding that these discoveries are all recorded and then posted online. So you'll be able to come back and access it that way. If you do have any questions about any of the research or data or charts or anything like that, you can just send me an email. Okay. Third question from Joshua Kelly. Can you comment on how energy savings and budgets and the scorecard more broadly is or may be impacted by some programs shifting from energy efficiency to GHG reduction, operational and potentially embedded? He is wondering if some of the program spending in energy might be missed if they're under a climate or carbon umbrella instead of EE. So this is a great question. We are Efficiency Canada. We are focused on energy efficiency. And so therefore the scorecard is also very much focused on energy efficiency. Obviously, energy efficiency is one of the most important tools that we have to fight climate change and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so to the extent that we've heard that in the scorecard so far, our focus has largely been on policies and programs that use energy efficiency potentially in service of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and not necessarily coming at it from a greenhouse gases perspective first. So suffice it to say, there most likely is activity, some of the provinces at least, that have to do with greenhouse gas reductions in industry or in buildings that may include energy efficiency improvements, but most likely we would be aware of those. And I feel like what we have captured in the scorecard is an accurate reflection of provincial investment in programs for energy efficiency, but not necessarily the broader energy climate perspective.
Can I follow up on that? I think it's a great question. Obviously, so I think we are missing some things, but I think that's a big problem because we ask for the energy numbers, and if jurisdictions cannot essentially calculate how they got their GHG emission reductions from energy savings and how much of that was perhaps like energy savings versus some other issue like chemical changes and things like that, that suggests there's an issue with the evaluation and monitoring of some of the GHG reduction programs. And I think that's a really interesting policy issue that James and I have written about. Is one of the strengths of traditional demand side management is that the programs are evaluated, the numbers are clear, the numbers are transparent, and sometimes with a lot of the GHG reduction initiatives, the numbers are not very transparent and it's not quite clear how the numbers are evaluated. So I'm hoping that in the future, we focus on greenhouse gas emission and we realign energy efficiency to focus on net zero emissions. That's something that we're going to continue to work on, but we don't lose the ability to actually get transparent outcome data from GHG initiatives. But from what we've tracked, like I don't feel like we're missing too much. There's definitely some initiatives in Alberta and British Columbia where I think it was hard to get data. In the maritime provinces where they do a lot of fuel oil work, it's been hard to get data from Newfoundland and Labrador, but in the other maritime provinces, the data is quite transparent.
Awesome. Thanks, Brendan. Okay, question from Nick Schroeder. Can you confirm how federal initiatives through NRCan, FCM, CMHC, et cetera, are taken into consideration in the scorecard? I assume they're excluded. Yes. If you mean the spending that is coming from the federal government directly on those programs, this is not something that's included in the scorecard. However, transfers to the provinces through the Low Carbon Economy Fund for the purposes of administering energy efficiency programs in the provinces is included in the scorecard figures, at least in terms of the program spending and savings. That's how that works.
The federal policy recommendations that we make are not necessarily saying this is the top priority for the federal government. It's saying this is how the federal government can really help work well with the provinces and territories. And I guess to that point we're making about really needing to think about how the initiatives complement each other, touches in how we touch on the data. If a federal program is going through the provinces, right, we count that federal money, so to speak. But yeah, it doesn't include things like a lot of the initiatives and say like the Canada Infrastructure Bank as well, right? So if it's just pure federal policy, it's not counted in the scorecard.
There was one in the chat about extending the scorecard to municipalities. I'll just quickly address that. To date, we've not done that, and we don't have any immediate plans to do that, but that is definitely something that's on our radar, and we're thinking about it and how we can explore ways to do something similar to the scorecard, but for cities or municipalities. Okay, David Katz asked a question in the Q&A about tax credits in reference to our federal recommendation about requirements for 100% efficient or net zero emissions space and water heating, and he asks if tax credits provided for that equipment could help or do a similar thing.
I think it might be in the last federal economic statement that came out just a couple of weeks ago, there was an announcement of some tax credits for clean technology. And I think out of the energy efficiency audience, the most interested that included heat pumps and other clean heating technologies. I think that's exciting. The question I have, which I don't have answered yet, is it's for businesses, right? And I don't know if, say, someone who's a residential contractor or even like an association of residential contractors could wholesale purchase and get that tax credit for, say, heat pumps going into residential properties. That's an open question. I suspect not in my reading of it, but that's a question that I've asked around, and so we'll see.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brendan. Martin Green asks, thermal power stations in Canada typically reject more than 50% of their energy as heat to the environment. In Europe, that heat is used for district heating. Would you consider including district heating and cooling and cogeneration in the scorecard? This is a really good question. I'll take a stab at it. And Brendan, if you want to add something to it, in the first edition of the scorecard, the 2019 scorecard, we did include a look at cogeneration and combined heat and power. We came to the conclusion that it wasn't an area that was being actively pursued by the provinces and that a lot of potential that existed had already been met. I think that's definitely something that we can revisit and have a second look at for sure. But we did look at it in an earlier scorecard. And so if you can go back to the 2019 version, you might be able to find some information that we tracked down.
We found it hard to find explicit data on that, right, across all the provinces in particular, but it is included in some respects. For instance, if you have an industrial program that has cogeneration as essentially a measure, or district heating as a measure, it's included in that way. And then we also have a section on energy planning and community energy planning, where heating can play a really important role. So those are the areas we're picking up on in the scorecard now, but we're always happy to figure out how to make it better. So any ideas on where to get good data on that would be much appreciated.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brendan and Alyssa, and all of our participants for the excellent questions and for being interested in the things that Efficiency Canada is doing, but also our weekly discovery sessions as well. Again, if this is the first one that you've come to, I hope we did a good job in showing you how awesome they are. So by all means, please check out our website where you can sign up to receive future updates for the discovery sessions and you can see future topics. I apologize if there maybe was some questions in the chat that we didn't get to. Again, you can reach out to us at info@efficiencycanada.org. I also posted my email address in the chat as well, so you can reach out to me. And we're just really happy to see that people are interested in the scorecard and hope that you find it to be a useful resource in your work over the course of the next year and so forth. So thanks again.